Today we're doing episode 3, which I have entitled Congo, the True Face of Capitalism. And as I've said many times before, and likely will say many times again, you really cannot separate the story of colonialism from the story of capitalism. They are completely intertwined because capitalism always needs resources to exploit to maximize profits. So it's going to support colonialism. And the people that go and do the colonialism need capitalism to fund them to do it. So the two are hand in hand and are evil twins, and you can't tell one story without the other. And the story could never be complete without talking about what is probably the greatest example of colonial exploitation, and that's the story of the Congo. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But of course, this is a story that's as much about capitalism as it is about colonial subjugation and horrors. So, in order to really tell this story, we kind of need to have a little bit of understanding of why capitalism is so exploitative, because it is super pertinent to the rest of this story. And I like to summarize it by calling it the capitalism pyramid of exploitation. And I do see capitalism as a pyramid scheme. Like at the top, you've got billionaires profiting from all the misery, and at the bottom, you've got the workers facing brutal conditions, like in a pyramid structure. How much you suffer under capitalism really just depends on where you stand on that pyramid. Like if you're at the top, you're in the 1%, you control every law, you own all the land, the military does your bidding, you're trying to take over all the world's resources, you're flying around in the planet killing private jets, you don't care about anything, you don't have a worry in the world. Then like in the middle of the pyramid, which is everyone who's in like the imperial heart. So if you're in America or Australia or Europe, and they used to call this, like the middle class, but it's really just the working class. But you get to live in the end of the world where all of the money of colonialism ends up. You're the working class that lives in the heart of the capitalist empires. And here, you might make decent money, but you're also shackled by endless debt and bombarded by consumerism, crushed under the weight of mortgages, car loans, student loans, healthcare debt, personal loans, phone payments, a million fucking subscriptions. You know what it's like, right? Because even though you're always out there spending money, you also somehow don't actually own anything anymore. Like this is a hard life, but it is still nothing compared to what is at the bottom of the capitalist pyramid. Because the bottom of the capitalist pyramid, that's the true face of capitalism. And this is where the majority of the world's population actually lives, the absolute rock bottom of the pyramid. And the bottom of this pyramid is where the workers of, I'm going to use massive air quotes, where the global south or the third world, the developing countries, or whatever euphemism you want to use for the most exploited and enslaved peoples on the planet under capitalism. This is where most of the people of the world live. The people who are paid, mere cents to work 12-hour days in deadly mines where children work in brutal sweatshops for multinational corporations. And, you find other people have to work in like backbreaking mega plantations to churn out cash crops while their own people starve because they're not allowed to make food anymore because it has to just be money for the capitalists. This is the subjugation of billions of people. And it's not an unfortunate side effect of capitalism. It's not that we're not developing them fast enough. This is the exploitation. It is intentional, and it is the whole damn point of capitalism. And the only reason this is even possible is because capitalist countries use their militaries to maraud and threaten, the rest of the planet, setting up military bases and occupying countries. Obviously, the United States is the main country doing this, but a lot of Europe does. So does Australia, Britain historically, France, forcing, and then they force like the global south countries to take economy-shattering loans, and then the occupied countries have to have their resources and labor stripped and stolen with impunity by corporations. And all the while, the militaries that have these bases everywhere, they're out singing about democracy and freedom. Like, my God, right? Anyway, so next time like you hear someone say that like capitalism lifted millions of people out of poverty, remind them that in reality, capitalism actually sent billions of people into poverty. And this whole system, like it needs an exploited global south to generate these massive profits. Like you need to get these resources for basically free in order to fund and drive consumerism in the global north. This is the only way you can make massive profits and massive profit growths, to keep this capitalist machine running. Meanwhile, the middle class and developing nations just gets we get just enough to keep us comfortable, to stop us from rebelling. Although I think we're seeing that start to crumble now. And all the while, the billionaires, 1%, they're amassing unprecedented wealth and political power through this global supply chain of exploitation. And I like to point out too that terms like developed and developing nations, or the first world and the third world, you just see how many air quotes I'm throwing up right now. Like, these are deliberately misleading terms, because in reality there are only exploiters and the exploited. The wealth of the so-called developed nations comes purely from centuries of colonial pillaging and exploiting other regions in the global south. And it is also important to point out that the poverty in developing nations isn't natural or inevitable. Like, they weren't like this historically. For most of their history, they have like a parity with the wealth of the rest of the world. This massive disparity, this creation of the first and third world, it's a direct result of centuries of resource theft and political destabilization, war, economic exploitation, like everything capitalism and colonialism does. And the wealthy nations and the corporations, they're the ones who push this exploitation. And that's really what colonialism is. That's what neocolonialism is. And capitalism and colonialism are completely intertwined, as I'll always say and will keep saying, because it's super important to understand. The third world was created by the first world, and the wealth of the first world is only possible by looting the third world. And neither of those two worlds would exist, and neither of them are natural without the existence of the other. And it's capitalism that is spread across the world by colonialism that has created this dynamic. And like, once you see that, you'll never be able to unsee it. And if we're talking about the absolute bottom of the capitalist exploitation pyramid, well, then rock bottom has to be the Congo, because it's one of the most mercilessly exploited places by capitalism on the earth. And the start of their story isn't as bad as some of the other countries in Africa that first experience colonialism, because Congo's kind of in central Africa, on the west side, on the Atlantic side. And it wasn't one of the countries that was pulled into the transatlantic slave trade, not in a big numbers anyway. And before the European invasion, the Congo Basin is home to some of Africa's most advanced and like sophisticated societies too. The region had these like big, powerful, centralized kingdoms. Like, they weren't even decentralized. This is not a tribal society. These are like centralized kingdoms. And there's like three big ones. There's the Congo, the Luba, and the Lunda empires. And they've all got their own complex political systems. They've got thriving economies. They've got these like really rich cultural traditions, tons of history. And this is history that, of course, Europeans will have to erase to justify colonialism. One of the main things colonialism loves to say when it's taking over a country is this place, they were uncivilized. There was nothing here before we got here. Like in the case of Australia, they literally declared it terra nullius, like no one's land. And the only way you can do that is by erasing a lot of this history. And even now, when I was researching this podcast, I'm struggling to find a lot of really good details about these kingdoms, but I can find enough to know that they had really, really rich histories, and a lot of that gets erased by the European invasion. The Congo, the kingdoms in the Congo, they even have like diplomatic relations with Europeans as early as like the late 15th centuries. They're already trading with Portugal, even exchange ambassadors at one point, and they're trading at this point as like, pretty much equals. The Luba Empire especially has developed like this elaborate system of checks and balances to limit royal power. It's awesome. Like, they've got budding democracy here and everything. And like, the Kuba Kingdom is also one of Africa's most artistically accomplished civilizations. They're making these amazing textile sculptures. They've even got like this whole they call it like the raffia cloth currency system. It's really clever. It's not at all like what's going to replace it under capitalism. These societies are basically practicing communal land ownership. They're maintaining extensive trade networks that are going across Central Africa and with each other. They've even developed like advanced metallurgy. Like they've got these amazing blacksmiths, and they're making like really intricate copper works. It's awesome. Go and look up some of the pictures of them because it's awesome. So far from being primitive, these civilizations had their own like written histories, legal systems, economic models that prioritized collective well-being as well over individual accumulation of wealth, which is what capitalism is going to come and destroy. And so Congo's going fine at this point, and that'll all come to a crashing halt when the Berlin Conference is held and all the European colonial powers basically divide up Africa between them. There's no African representative at any point in this conference. It's just the colonial powers worried that they're going to fight each other, and they're going to set up these boundaries so that everyone can have their own little area. Poor Congo is going to go to Leopold II of Belgium, and unlike the other colonial countries that are going to be set up, Congo isn't going to be owned by Belgium directly. It's going to be a personal colony of the king, Leopold II. And he then basically announces he's going to create a humanitarian mission. That's what he says, this is a humanitarian mission. When the Belgians get to Congo, they will unleash one of the most horrific genocidal campaigns the world has ever seen. It rivals anything you see the Nazis do. And the reason they're doing this, again, you cannot separate capitalism and colonialism, is they already know Congo is rich in some of the most valuable resources on the planet. And Leopold basically just wants to open this place up to private enterprises to just get every single bit of resource out of there they can. And he will declare the Congo, it gets its own name called the Congo Free State. And this is like 1885. Any Belgian person wants to go to Congo and just carve up a bit of land, take this bit of land and do whatever you want to the people living there while you take as much resources as you can. That's totally fine. This is total genocidal private enterprise. This is completely unfettered capitalism. And the thing about having unfettered, completely free reign capitalism is there's no limits to the horrors it is willing to perpetrate to create profit. And in Congo, that will take the form of what's known as the rubber quotas. If you're a Belgian, you're allowed to go there and take some land, and there's a huge demand for rubber. So that's what everyone's going to grow. That's the cash crop. The king has said that there will be quotas. We expect a certain amount of rubber every quarter. And so to make sure that these quotas are met, these private enterprises will recruit soldiers to just go and brutalize the Congolese population to incentivize them to work harder. And they do some of the most horrific things you can imagine. They will start cutting off people's hands if they don't meet their quota. They'll just start cutting off people's hands. They will start taking the wives and the women and the children of workers hostage to compel them to work, and when they don't hit their quota, they'll send their hands and feet back to them. They'll burn entire villages down if they try to resist. This is some of the most sadistic violence you've ever seen. It's so bad that a lot of these soldiers won't even use bullets because they don't want to waste them. They'll just go and club people to death or machete them to death or just all sorts of horrible cruelty and torture on these people. It's so bad that the population will basically be halved. About 20 million people will die by either murder, starvation, disease, or as a result of the torture, or as a result of trying to escape Belgian oppression. And it's also worth noting that the British have a hand in this too. They are never far away from any colonial atrocity. The Belgian and the British companies they'll form like joint stock ventures together. And there's one particular company called the Anglo-Belgian Indian Rubber Company, and its profits skyrocket through all of this. They go up like 700% during this whole period of just completely unfettered exploitation. It's one of the first really recognized international human rights abuses. Although the outcry is very small at this point in history, it's worth noting that a lot of people are hearing about what's going on in the Congo and they are rightfully horrified. This is colonialism at its peak. Like, it doesn't have any morals or ethics, doesn't care about anything but just maximizing capitalist profit. And as we said, we've seen nearly 20 million people be killed as a result of that. And it's worth pointing out that this time span we're talking about here, this is only like 20 years, 25 years, I think. This will go until about 1908. Remember, they only got there in 1885. So this is just insane amounts of violence and horror. And the violence does start to subside in the early 20th century. So, about 1908 or so. The violence reduces not because of big public outcry about all of these abuses, although that does exist, but that's not the reason they'll start not being as violent. The reason is simply because the price of rubber starts to drop and normalize as they start finding other places to produce rubber, like Vietnam and Nigeria as well. And so the rubber prices start to normalize. So there's really not that much incentive to just keep murdering and brutalizing people to produce rubber because it's just not worth the cost. So again, it's purely capitalist greed that actually stops the violence. It just stops being profitable. Isn't that just absolute typical capitalism? Anyway, but this doesn't mean that the horrors for the Congo are over. They're just going to evolve and change into something else. And once the big rubber boom is over, everyone starts noticing, well, Congo's got all sorts of resources. We don't just have to do rubber. There's lots of minerals here. It's one of the biggest copper deposits in the world. It even has uranium, which, by the time the 1940s come around and the emergence of nuclear power, that'll also be something they start exploiting Congo over. But at this point, it's mainly the copper. This is when you start seeing, and again, I'm using massive air quotes, you start seeing the colonial development of the Congo. It's one of the things that, people who support colonialism like to point out is we brought civilization and we brought infrastructure and technology to these lands, and they start building these big roads through the Congo, but they only go from the copper mines to the port. They don't actually go out into the villages. They don't help the people. These are not things that are designed to make the lives of Congolese workers any easier. It's only there to facilitate the rapid draining of minerals from the Congo. And working in Congolese mines back then is just as bad as it is today. They are paid a pittance and the conditions are deadly. There is no safety equipment, there is no safety standards because again, colonial enterprises and corporations that own these mines don't see it as being cost effective to keep the workers alive. You can always replace the workers. So the fatality rates in these mines are just absolutely insane. Also, the idea that any of these European colonials are bringing some sort of civilization to the Congo is absolute nonsense because not only did they completely dismantle all of the great education system that Congo already had before the Europeans arrived there, the colonial education system that replaces it is deliberately designed to not educate people in anything that could actually improve their social mobility. It's just there to teach them how to work in mines and things like that. There's actually a statistic which is, I researched this while I was looking up this podcast, and it even stunned me that by 1960, so this is after like 50 years of Belgian colonial rule, there are only 16 Congolese university graduates in the entire country. 16. Not 1,600, 16. So even access to any of the universities there, this is an apartheid state too, it's worth pointing out. There aren't that many kind of Belgian settlers in the Congo, but all of the institutions and all of the advancement that colonialism brought is only for the white people that live there. It is not for any of the Congolese people. Through everything that we've talked about so far, there has been massive resistance from the Congolese people. They are not just laying down, they're not doormats, they're not subservient. There is frequent uprisings, there are lots of strikes. All the way through this entire story, workers are demanding better pay, they are demanding safety, they are asking for all this stuff, but of course, they are just met with violence anytime they really try to win any of these rights or in any of these better conditions that they so desperately need. And the fact that the colonial overlords won't barely even give them the crumbs from the table, and they're also brutalizing them anytime they try to win any kind of freedom or any kind of equal pay or anything like that, is the reason you start seeing a growing independence movement in the Congo. And when I'm reading this story, I'm thinking, like, it's about damn time. Like, get rid of these goddamn Belgians. They are awful. But of course, by 1960, Belgium isn't that much in control of Congo anymore, because during World War II, Belgium is, of course, occupied by Nazi Germany, and they lose a lot of their strength in the few colonies they have. And basically, the British and American corporations have already moved into the Congo, and they've taken over, de facto taken over a lot of control of this place, even though it's still technically owned by the Belgians. Really, it's in the hands of the corporations from America and Britain. And of course, after World War II, there's less appetite for anyone to directly own colonies anymore. Anyway, I talk about this in like every podcast and video, but you can't downplay how much the idea of self-determination, like freedom and democracy, and all the things that were used as, the propaganda for fighting World War II, a lot of people took that to heart. So the idea of, fighting a war, it's huge world war for freedom, and then turning around and basically continuing to enslave people in other parts of the world, it's a really bad look and it's very jarring. And a lot of people have learned that you can't do this anymore. You got to start adopting neo-colonialism. So we're going to keep control of the resources, but politically, we have to at least make it look like there's self-determination in these countries. And they're going to do the same to Congo. They're going to start holding elections in Congo for Congolese nationals to, basically come say, I'm going to lead the country. But then, of course, behind closed doors, it's yes, you can lead the country as long as you do exactly what the US corporations and the British corporations say. Otherwise, the CIA will take care of you. Of course, that's actually a little bit further in the story. I'm jumping ahead here because at this point, they're thinking we can just have these elections and, whatever, we'll be able to work with whoever is elected. But they're not ready for who actually is elected. There's an unexpected election victory. His name's Patrice Lumumba, and he's awesome. He takes the independence idea very, very seriously. And even during his inauguration speech, he's straight up denouncing colonialism. The Belgian king is like watching this, and they're even thinking on the spot that they should just arrest Lumumba right then and there, because this is not what they were expecting to happen. And he comes out with all sorts of left-wing policies. He wants to nationalize all the resources. He wants to really improve education, women's rights, all of it, all the usual good socialist stuff. He's all for it. And this immediately makes all the Western colonial powers very, very nervous, and they jump into action straight away to sabotage his government, and they start funding separatists, especially and very notably in the mineral-rich areas of the Congo, especially Katanga. And Katanga and South Kasai are areas that are very important to this story because they're the two areas that are the most rich in the resources in the Congo, and they're the two areas that see the most violence even to this day. So the West is funding the separatists in these areas specifically in the Congo. And Lumumba, he's a smart guy. He can see what's happening here. He can see the separatists building up in these areas. He knows that there's Western money behind it, and so he does the sensible thing, and he basically goes to the Soviet embassy and he goes, hey, we would like to align with the Soviet bloc. Can you guys protect us? Can you send soldiers? Can you send support, weapons, everything so that we can protect our national sovereignty and protect our freedom? But the CIA, of course, cables everywhere, and they know this communication is going on. And that is basically what signs Lumumba's own death warrant. The fact that he is actively looking to align himself to the Soviet Union, that's the red line for the CIA. Not that they really needed much reason. They were looking to get rid of this guy already anyway. And so only about a year into Lumumba's rule, he is then kidnapped by Belgian officials. He's tortured, executed, and his body is dissolved in a vat of acid. What's creepy extra creepy about this story. This is all absolutely horrible. But apparently, the people that killed him started taking souvenirs. And this is the most like grotesque colonial nonsense right here. This is very much on brand for what the Europeans have been doing in Congo this whole time. And apparently, one of the people that killed Lumumba kept his tooth as a trophy, and he kept it all the way up until 2016 when it finally got returned. Once they murder Lumumba, however, this, again, the Congolese people do not take this lying down. There's a big rebellion that's launched in response to the assassination of Lumumba. It's called the Simba Rebellion, and it is definitely a Marxist-flavored insurgency. There's a whole guerrilla war that starts being waged across like half the country. The Simba Rebellion, they start basically saying, if we're not going to be granted independence, we're just going to take it for ourselves and we're going to start to decentralize. I'm going to set up our own communities. Che Guevara will actually show up in the country at one point and fight alongside them for months. You can see the Congolese people are really out here fighting genuinely for their independence, and they're doing it under socialism. This is retake control of their country and kick out the Western forces. This will be a whole theme that goes on for the rest of Congo's history up to this day, by the way. But this is also the high watermark of the Vietnam War and the high watermark of the Red Scare. And the CIA and America are determined to make sure that socialism does not take root in this one of the most resource-rich places on the planet. And they will start funneling in everything from weapons to death squads. They'll even start sending in mercenaries, basically. And they're basically just US soldiers. A lot of them are Vietnam War veterans themselves. And they'll go in there and just start facilitating training and joining in death squads that go all over Congo looking for the socialist leaders that are leading the Simba Rebellion and just killing them any chance they get. Atrocities and human rights abuses are, or again, like as with all of Congo's history, they're just insane. They're all over the place. They're uncountable. This period in particular, and this is 1964, 1965 kind of era, and it really gives you a light into just how far America is willing to go to protect colonialism and capitalism. The lengths of the violence they're willing to use, well, there is no limit. And the Simba Rebellion will be effectively defeated. There are a lot of fragments that just splinter off into their own little groups, and a lot of them are still out there to this day. But the organized and centralized resistance is crushed, and a new puppet state is set up in the Congo under a guy called Mobutu. And he is an absolute US lackey, and he will be used to basically demonstrate the tactics and the strategy going forward for neo-colonial plunder. It's estimated that while he was the president, I'm using air quotes, the president of Congo, more than $15 billion will just disappear from the Congolese treasury. Pretty much all the resources are once again back under foreign capitalist corporate hands. He will also at this point rename the country Zaire, and he will institute this program in the 70s called Zaireanization. And ostensibly on the surface, it's about developing the Congo. Again, this is what you see, the beginning of the terms like the developed and developing countries and the first and third world and all of that. This is when that's really starting to come into effect. And Zaireanization, it's so hard to say, is on the surface about improving people's lives and making the place, more developed. But really all it's doing is handing everything over to foreign businesses and cronies, and it will cause economic collapse in Congo. And again, this is when the IMF then step in and go, well, we can offer you all these loans, right? We can help you get your country back on back on track. But, this is a massive loan, and it's got you'll never be able to pay it back. And when you default, we're going to take all of your resources. Oh, and you still have to pay back the loan as well. So make sure you cut all your healthcare and everything else. And this whole period, Zaireanization, will just smash the living standard in the Congo almost completely. Inflation goes up 70%. It'll reach a high water mark, and I had to check this twice. Inflation will go up by 23,000% under this massive privatization program. when the Great Depression happened, how Germans had to get wheelbarrows of cash to go buy bread. Well, that actually happens here in the Congo as well. And of course, you can imagine that the resentment from the normal, Congolese people is very, very high. The CIA is, of course, getting ready for that too, and they create a secret police force called SNIP. And they will basically just go around torturing and killing anyone that starts to speak out against this program and speaks out against Mobutu. But nonetheless, resistance persists, and there'll be massive protests all the way through the 70s. There'll even be another rebellion, the Shaba Rebellion in 1978. And this whole era will go on for a shockingly long time. It'll go all the way until 1997. This will lead to the First Congo War. This place has been in pretty much non-stop war unofficially ever since the Europeans first showed up. But this is the first official Congo War between 1996 and 1997. And it's interesting because it's also one of the first examples of a proxy war. So again, when there's a revolution, and it looks like all of these privatization policies are going to be overthrown, because again, there's still a lot of Lumumba supporters out there and socialists that can see how horrible this system is and life under capitalism is, and they do lead that revolution. But America knows it can't just directly go in and retake control of the country, because that'd be a very, very bad look. So instead, America decides, we're going to start a proxy war. We won't send our own troops in. We have puppets in other African countries as well. We have Museveni in Uganda, and we have Kagame in Rwanda. Why don't we use them to go and get the Congo under control, get it back into the US family? And so the US will fund Rwanda and Uganda invading the Congo. And of course, they go straight to the mines. They go to all the mining areas and take control of those. And then, for security, US mineral companies are going to come in and take over production of those mines. This will keep escalating, and the violence will get worse all the way up into 2003. It'll become what's kind of colloquially known as Africa's World War, because this thing will just keep expanding, and like 9 nations are going to get pulled into it, especially once other resources are discovered in the Congo, especially coltan and diamonds. And it's the coltan especially, and eventually they're going to find cobalt and lithium as well. And that's what's going to set up the dynamic for all the horrors that's happening in the Congo today. And it's worth noting that all of the countries that have now invaded Congo, and they're pretty much all African nations, but all of them are doing it on US corporate interests. And you can really see this in the fact that all of these resources in the Congo are just being stripped out of the place and being sent to places like Rwanda and Uganda. And then all these minerals and all the wealth is just disappearing from that point. At the same time, you find all these US mineral companies reporting record profits. Isn't that just an interesting coincidence? Anyway, this is starting to get out of hand, however, and the violence is starting to spread, and it's starting to threaten to destabilize a lot of countries, pretty much all in Central and East Africa. So America goes, this is probably not great for trade if we have all of our puppets endlessly fighting each other. And by 2003, the place, Congo is very effectively destabilized and ripped apart, and the violence starts to de-escalate, although it doesn't ever truly go away. All of the US and European companies, and at this point, even shamefully Chinese corporations are starting to show up, because everyone knows that now that Congo is completely destabilized, it's a free-for-all. You can take whatever your forces can get control of, you can exploit and you can steal, and no one's going to stop you. And that leads kind of to the dynamic that we see today. Foreign corporations own pretty much everything in Congo. They've already stripped everything that isn't welded down in the country. And there are big corporations which deserve to be named. Glencore, for one, Apple, Tesla. They're all there stealing everything from the Congo, especially now the lithium. It's estimated that Apple so far has extracted, and I don't think you're ready for this number, $24 trillion worth of minerals from the Congo, and that's being used and put into your iPhones and everything today. Congolese miners, of course, don't make anything. They make less than $2 a day. Kids are working in these mines, and the conditions are, if anything, worse than they were back in the heyday of Belgian colonialism. You may also have heard about the M23 rebellion. These guys are interesting because on the surface they appear to be freedom fighters, but really noticing that they are in control of about 70% of Congo's gold mines and gold trade, and all of that trade flows into Rwanda. So you can't really see M23 as being an actual liberation movement when they are being funded by Rwanda while Rwanda steals all of the resources that they capture. And that's really the important point of this story, is just noticing how all of this suffering is caused by capitalism. All of the colonial exploitation is caused by capitalism. Because if Congo wasn't basically the richest resource country in the world, none of these countries would be bothering it. No one would bother attacking or invading Congo or destabilizing Congo if they didn't have all of these resources. I often think about the first guy who found lithium in Congo. I bet that personally he was happy that he would be able to sell this big, chunk of lithium for a good price, and it might make him personally rich. He would have known in the bottom of his heart that the mere existence and finding that lithium meant millions of his countrymen were about to die, because once the corporations find out, they're going to do the same thing they did with the rubber, what they did with the copper, what they did with the gold, what they did with the coltan, and now they're doing it with the lithium. Congo is never going to know peace so long as capitalism and imperialism exist. And so that's really been Congo's horrible story, how they used to be a beautiful and very advanced country until colonialism came along. And then there was Leopold's genocide, and it goes all the way up to the modern corporate plunder. Like, Congo's suffering is just because of the insatiable greed of capitalism and its need to just have more and more resources to just keep that profit growth going every single quarter. We need to make more this quarter, so we need to exploit Congo more. And the liberation struggle in Congo has never stopped, and it has always been valiant. And I know they will be free. The Congolese people have been fighting back this whole time, and their story is criminally undertold. But they're never going to know independence until this imperialism ends. And so I suppose it's fitting then that I should end this little subject by quoting the man himself, Patrice Lumumba. He has a great quote, and this just really speaks to his spirit. And I think that he might very well speak for the spirit of all the Congolese people when he said, "No brutality has ever forced me to ask for grace, because I prefer to die with my head high than live in submission." Goddamn right. And I know Congo will be free, and Lumumba's words will eventually be eternal. Hope you've enjoyed episode 3 of the Triploid podcast. Got a little bit dark there, didn't it? But I suppose you can't really tell Congo's story without doing that darkness, and I really hope I've done it justice. I mean, I've done my best in 40 odd minutes covering this as best I can. If you are enjoying this, I'd like to ask you a little favor. If you wouldn't mind telling someone about it, or better yet, heading to the patreon.com/triploid, and just becoming a member, free member, because the more people I can get to just kind of view this podcast, I just want to build that audience, and I'm going to ask you for some help doing that. So thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any thoughts or comments, or if you've got any ideas for future videos, always feel free to send me a message. Easiest to get me through TikTok, but if you send me a message, I'll get to it. So thank you very much. Stay safe out there, and we'll be back with episode 4, maybe a week or two. We'll see how we go. And hopefully this has given you something to think about.